Omniscient Reader's Viewpoint. By Sing Shong. Chapter 227. Breaking the Sky Sword Saint. Part 1. After the completion of the senior grade Dakibi test, Baihyung was somehow lazy. All he had to do was manage the Korean Peninsula scenario that was left to him by the former Seoul branch manager, Baram. Sometimes, all he had to do was lie down and watch the scenarios he made. Hyun SSI. It's this way. Damn, I missed one. One person is going to the north. On the screen, one of the scenarios on the Korean Peninsula called Catching the Mole was in full swing. It was a scenario where they had to catch all the bomb moles that escaped within a certain time. A terrible explosion would occur if one was missed, but the constellations on the Korean Peninsula didn't seem distressed. Titano found it. I'll take care of it with you, Sung. The incarnation showed perfect organization and teamwork. It was different from some countries where a quarter of the land was blown away from similar scenarios. Of course, this scenario wouldn't be approved if it had such extreme difficulty. Damn, why is it like this? Baihyung grumbled as he bit his fingers. In fact, he could increase the difficulty of the scenario much higher. It could blow up half the Korean Peninsula and lead the incarnations to a terrible disaster. However, he didn't do so. I should have saved Kim Dokja at that time. If I raise the difficulty here, they will surely die. It was too late to regret it now. No matter how many preparations were made, it was impossible to live outside the scenario. The constellations of the Korean Peninsula are supporting Kim Dokja's party. The constellations of the Korean Peninsula have sponsored 2,000 coins. The reason why Baihyung's channel was maintained was due to the subscribers Kim Dokja left behind. The constellations were steadily supporting the scenario, regardless of whether they were interesting or not. However, the channel didn't only have such constellations. Many constellations are bored with the progress of the scenario. Some constellations have left the channel. Kim Dokja had disappeared and Yoo Jong-hyuk left the Korean Peninsula scenario. Thus, the number of constellations abandoning the channel grew every day. In other words, Baihyung was slowly dying. I need to make changes. But how? Of course, he knew how. If he raised the difficulties of the scenarios like before and tricked the constellations, the subscribers would increase again. Nevertheless, Baihyung no longer wanted to lead the scenario that way. Maybe I've changed as well. He had changed from his old self who only pursued unconditionally stimulating scenarios and didn't care much about the life and death of the incarnations. Baihyung wanted to tell a different story. He wanted to forget the cider that the Bureau mentioned and see different scenarios. Just like the scenarios made by the first generation Dakibis, something that would be remembered for a long time by the Dakibis. Baihyung. Baihyung heard something through the Dakibi communication and reflexively rose. You look good. Have you been well? The face that emerged on the panel was Baram, former Seoul branch manager who left the Seoul Dome after becoming a great Dakibi candidate. The astounded Baihyung quickly acted politely. After leaving the Seoul branch, Baram entered the Senior Administrative Bureau. It was a place where the wisest Dakibis around the world gathered. Baram on the panel seemed more impressive than he did before. I contacted you because I have a few messages. A few. Baihyung was a bit nervous. It was because he never received good news when Baram spoke in such a meaningful manner. There are signs of a giant story. Isn't there still a lot of time left until Gigantomachia or Ragnarok? It isn't those stories. The giant story is being set up in the demon world. Baihyung's expression changed at the words demon world. Is it the Demon King selection? Baihyung watched Baram nodding and gulped. Unlike the giant stories that appeared on a regular basis, the Demon King selection was a very rare scenario. Baihyung had never seen the Demon King scenario in person. The last selection tournament was already 800 years ago. Just imagining the giant story caused his heart to shake with excitement. Baram read Baihyung's heart and laughed. Are you looking forward to it? I'm looking forward to it, but I also feel regret. Who was the Dakibi responsible for it? The demon world had been the domain of the Weni people since ancient times. It was a barren scenario area where channels almost never opened. This was the demon world. Then the broadcast of the Demon King selection. This time is different. The Bureau has decided to dispatch Dakibis to the demon world. Huh? That. The Dakibis didn't interfere in the work of the Weni people, and the Weni people didn't interfere in the work of the Dakibis. This was the promise of the horizon. Now Baram's words were directly contradicting the covenant. I was originally planning to open a channel after signing a new agreement with the Weni people, but it has become more complicated. They broke the promise first. They broke the promise? An illegal channel has occurred in the demon world. Huh? It was something that couldn't happen according to common sense. There were no Dakibis in the demon world. Then how was a channel opened? I'm not sure about the exact details. That's why the Bureau is in an uproar right now. If the Weni people stole a channel, can't you close it from here? The operating rights of the channel were limited to the Dakibi. Even if the Weni people stole a channel using a strange trick, the Bureau could easily handle it by closing 1 or 2 channels. The problem isn't the Weni people. It isn't the Weni people? Then who opened the channel? It seems there is a Dakibi in the demon world. Dakibi? Wait, perhaps? No. It wasn't possible. Baram kept speaking. In any case, that is why I've dispatched Dakibi from the Bureau to the demon world. I see. By the way, why are you telling me this? You are on the list to be sent. I'm in charge of the Korean Peninsula. Other Dakibis will take care of the Korean Peninsula for a while. Take a few intermediate Dakibis and go to the demon world. Baihyung was silent for a moment. Leave the hottest earth scenario and go to the demon world? This was the same as a demotion. Aren't there a few incidents on the Korean Peninsula anyway? Don't feel too sorry. Your dream of going higher can be achieved if you do this properly. You told me a similar story last time. Why me? I don't know the exact reason, but the elders pointed to you directly. There is no refusing if they have decided. Baihyung's expression became depressed. He had to go to that dangerous area? I know what you are thinking, but don't be too depressed. It isn't a demotion. Rather, I have one more piece of information that you might like to hear. Baihyung raised his head without any expectations, while Baram spoke in a strange voice. The Demon King of Salvation has appeared in the demon world. We were silent for a long time. 30 minutes passed after Yu Jonghyuk's words, before I finally opened my mouth. In these 30 minutes, I saw Aileen enter and leave the room once. Yu Jonghyuk, did you bring the Uriel doll? Yu Jonghyuk silently pulled out the doll at my question. I carefully examined the doll. The arms and legs were all torn apart. It might be a symbolic body, but Uriel's real body would have been impacted by such a blow. An archangel with such pride was suffering like this in the demon world. I can't go back now. I see. He answered as if he already knew. I turned my head and saw that Yu Jonghyuk was also watching the Uriel doll. We didn't speak, but we could clearly tell what the other person was thinking. Are you going to take part in the Demon King selection? That's right. The Demon King selection. It was a scenario I had to go through to confront the constellations in the future. I'm sorry for the party members, but I have to get a giant story here. I spoke while carefully attaching Uriel's torn arm. This way, I can prepare for the future destruction scenarios. My choices would be limited if I returned to Earth. I could get opportunities here and build up my power, so it wasn't efficient to go back now. The scenario difficulty had already become more terrible than the original novel. I would only lose time from my work if I returned to Earth. Yu Jonghyuk stared at me for a moment. It isn't a bad idea. His tone showed he understood many things. Perhaps Yu Jonghyuk understood my heart more than anyone else. It was because he lost his precious things when he was weak. I asked, "What are you going to do?" I am going to stay in the demon world for a while. There is a personal scenario here, so I can't leave right away. Oh, I see. Really? If you don't mind, why don't you help me out? I am helping myself, not you. I looked up at Yu Jong-hyuk because I wanted to know what he meant. It was clearly the same expressionless face as before, but something felt different. Are you also planning to participate in the Demon King selection? It is natural. My mind became complicated. This jerk, he was thinking about taking part in the Demon King selection. Wait. You told me to go back to Earth. Yu Jong-hyuk ignored me and got up to go to the window. The faint light of the sunset cast a dark shade on Yu Jong-hyuk's face. According to ways of survival, Yu Jong-hyuk pretended to have a cool face when he was caught. This bastard, he wanted to send me back to Earth and become the Demon King. The shameless back looked like it wanted to flee. Then Yu Jong-hyuk opened his mouth. They're coming. A cold surged from outside the window as Aileen and Mark ran through the door of the treatment room. I was able to know what was going on without listening to them. It was because Bayu had woken up and was staring at me nervously. The constellation Founder of Humanity is looking at the Yu Jong-hyuk Industrial Complex. The constellation The Last Pharaoh is looking at the Yu Jong-hyuk Industrial Complex. The constellations of certain nebulae are looking at the Yu Jong-hyuk Industrial Complex. More than a dozen stars twinkled in the sky, and one of them let out an intense burst of light and sparks. After a while, a huge shape started to appear at the entrance of the industrial complex. It was the direct descent of an incarnation body. It was a giant mummy with a golden crown on its head. The height surpassed the walls, and the incarnations in the industrial complex started screaming. If I remembered correctly, this constellation belonged to Papyrus. In addition, Papyrus had joined hands with Burkan. Yu Jong-hyuk spoke in a terrible tone. I guess they have come to protest. There was no need to ask what the protest was about. It was already the prelude to the Demon King selection. Chapter 228. Breaking the Sky Sword Saint. Part 2. Who is the industrial complex's new master? The colossal voice was heard, and Yu Jong-hyuk and I simultaneously looked out the window. Judging by the noisy streets, the use of a true voice was quite tough. Yu Jong-hyuk muttered in a small voice, a constellation of Papyrus. If it is the last pharaoh, it is probably that woman? A giant mummy with an old, golden crown. Everything was covered with bandages apart from the high nose. It was just like what I read in Ways of Survival. It was clear that the body belonged to Cleopatra, the last pharaoh of Egypt. Who is Yu Jong-hyuk? Once again, the true voice rang out through the industrial complex. It was certainly great, but neither of us were discouraged. Cleopatra was a great constellation at most. Yu Jong-hyuk and I were no longer nervous regarding great constellations. Yu Jong-hyuk. Can you win? It was an opponent I couldn't afford to go against while I currently had story packs hanging from my body. Yu Jong-hyuk shook his head. It is impossible right now. It will soon be time. Are you talking about the penalty? The one where you disappear for 10 minutes a day? Yu Jong-hyuk didn't answer. I accepted it as agreement and looked at Cleopatra. Then that person. She won't do anything. Why? The Demon King selection hasn't started yet. Naturally, the incarnation bodies of the constellations who weren't part of the scenario were constrained by probability. As long as the giant story hadn't opened yet, they couldn't act freely. Even so. Hey, have you already forgotten about Asmodeus? Not everyone can act like Asmodeus. I knew that much. It was because the Demon Kings had much fewer restrictions than the constellations in the demon world. The problem was the constellations could consume extra probability to overcome these constraints. Isn't Cleopatra a member of Papyrus? If she borrows the probability of the nebula, Kim Dokja. You have already forgotten what they have done. What? Before Yu Jong-hyuk could answer, I heard Cleopatra's voice in the air. Tell the new ruler of the industrial complex. He will surely die if he participates in the Demon King selection. Cleopatra's body started to disappear with these words. Like a massive sand castle collapsing, the body returned to dust. Keep this in mind. Papyrus will never warn you twice. Then why are you leaving so gently? It was strange. Usually, she would leave after killing hundreds of incarnations. Yu Jonghyuk opened his mouth like I was pathetic. Have you forgotten? They forced fate on you. Ah. That reminded me, there was such a thing. Papyrus, Vedas, and Olympus used a massive amount of probability to force my fate on me. It was the reason why Cleopatra easily disappeared. They now lacked probability. Yu Jonghyuk spoke in his distinctive somber voice. We bought some time before the Demon King selection. I nodded. At least for now, the constellations wouldn't attack this side. I checked the message logs. The Demon King selection is currently being prepared. Remaining preparation time, 28 days, 17 hours, and 12 minutes. If my prediction was correct, the Demon King selection would consume the 21st to 24th scenarios. It was a giant story, so it was natural to eat the scenarios. I measured the time remaining and said, the two of us alone isn't enough. I know. Once the Demon King selection started, the constellations would start to flock here. A great constellation might be lacking in strength, but they were still much stronger than normal incarnations. Moreover, once many of them started to appear, it would be difficult for only Yu Jonghyuk and I to deal with them. Do you have an idea? Yu Jonghyuk shook his head. There was a way to bring colleagues from Earth, but Li Hyunsung and Yong Hee-won still lacked the ability to fight against transcendence or constellations. They needed time to become stronger by alternating between personal scenarios and main scenarios. A full-scale power management would be possible when they entered the latter scenarios. I needed to find colleagues I could use right away. Have you gathered any colleagues here? Ah, there is. Speaking of which, where was Jang Haeung? I twisted my sore body and looked around. I sent him to search for group members. It is time for some results. Be prepared. I'll be leaving in a second. Before I could ask where he was going, Yu Jonghyuk disappeared from my view. I worked out my plan and left the treatment room after sorting out my bandages. Aileen said I should rest for 2 more weeks, but my physical condition wasn't that bad, perhaps because I was relaxed. The attribute Lamarck Kirin has increased the recovery effect. Ah, it was due to the effect of the attribute. The alarmed Aileen rushed over as I stepped outside and stretched. I interrupted her before she could open her mouth. Don't worry. Rather, can you heal this? Aileen received the Uriel doll and cocked her head. What is this? A constellation's symbolic body. Aileen made the mistake of dropping the doll to the ground. She hurriedly picked up the doll again and asked me, will I be punished for dropping it? Don't worry, she is a good constellation. Please firmly repair it. The constellation was nice. The words were strange to say, but I was talking to Uriel, not other constellations. I said I would go for a short stroll and emerged onto the streets of the industrial complex. The streets of the industrial complex were bathed in a dim light and seemed different from before. A few people recognized me and nodded lightly. I could see a vigor that I never saw before on their faces. Perhaps this was the expression of those who decided to live. Hey Yu Jonghyuk. Did you wake up? I turned around and saw someone running over here. Jang Haeung walked up to me and gave me a clumsy headlock. I tried to pull Jang Haeung off me. My name isn't Yu Jonghyuk. Oh, now you want to reveal your real name? You know? Well, I'm not the only one using a pseudonym. I stared at Jang Haeung for a while before speaking in a meaningful manner. My name is Kim Dokja. I spoke nice words, but Jang Haeung had a dazed expression. It is a strange name. I seem to have heard it before. It's fine. What were you doing? Oh, I was chatting to a few people and got a tip about this area. A tip? You don't know because you have been sleeping? Interesting things have happened in the industrial complex in the meantime. I heard from Jang Haeung about what happened in the past week. Of course, the most interesting thing was about Yoo Jong-hyuk. He rejected the ruling rights? That's right. He said he would become the duke, but he wouldn't rule here. Thus, everyone was in an uproar. The situation was clear. Maybe Yoo Jong-hyuk was practicing his motto of dominate but don't rule. That's what he said. The idea was good. However, the situation was bad. The order of the industrial complex must be out of control. If the situation isn't organized, that declaration would just create a security problem. That's why the citizens are excited right now. A powerful dictator had the power to control people's desires. Since a dictator gave up his power, the piled-up desires of the citizens would burst out at once. Do you think the darkness of the industrial complex will disappear if I die? These were the words of Duke Siswitz in Ways of Survival. I once again thought he was right. The industrial complex wouldn't suddenly change just because the ruler changed. Rather, the oppressive dictatorship had vanished and the people's hidden desires would become even more exposed. Hey, give me that fragment. I don't want to. I picked it up. Voices burst out like they had been waiting, and Jang Haeung and I simultaneously turned our heads. A large number of people were lynching an incarnation in an alley. The situation was obvious. They were fighting over a story fragment that came from the factory. I was about to move when Jang Haeung restrained me. Wait. Just watch. What? I told you, there was a tip. What is the tip? The Punisher will show up here. Punisher? I had never heard of such a position. There was no such position in the revolutionary scenario or Ways of Survival. Jang Haeung noticed my doubts and added, it's a nickname created by the citizens. A great beauty appeared a few days ago and has been maintaining the peace. At this moment, a man's shout was heard from inside the alley. Kill him and steal it. The men pulled out their weapons, and it seemed to be a full-fledged lynching. I would rather move first instead of waiting for the Punisher. The moment I moved my hand to the sword at my waist, a slender shadow appeared in the alley. Stop. A woman with a black cape covering her body was standing on the wall. I wasn't sure about her equipment because of the cape, but her face was very clear. It was a face that seemed to be on a different dimension from the world around it. I watched the woman's waist-long hair flapping in the wind and moved slowly in great shock. Was there such a figure in Ways of Survival? All of a sudden, the meaning of every praise word became clear. Deep sultry eyes were set beneath neat eyebrows. All the standards that determined beauty in the world were collapsed at the same time. It was a face that couldn't be described using the modifiers of a constellation. To my chagrin, there was only one way to express this face. There was no doubt it was a beauty that would slap Yoo Jong-hyuk on the cheeks 3 times. TL, in other words, put Yoo Jong-hyuk's beauty to shame by 3 times. There wasn't such an expression in Ways of Survival. In Ways of Survival, Jang Haeung was at most described as 2 slaps on the cheeks. I was stunned with shock, while the person who would slap Yoo Jong-hyuk twice whispered, she came. That person is the Punisher. The men were overwhelmed by the woman's beauty and belatedly woke up. Their lips moved and I knew what would emerge. Before their mouths could open, something moved. Then something fell. It was a little bit later that a man screamed. You Yuak. The man who had his arm cut off screamed terrible while the other people identified the situation and started fleeing. They noticed it was an enemy that couldn't deal with. Even the rescued man was terrified and ran out of the alley. In an instant, only the man's fallen arm and the woman remained in the alley. Jang Haeung watched the woman silently holding the sword and let out a burst of admiration. Look, isn't she really amazing? You told me to look for some useful people. I tried to talk to her yesterday, but she just disappeared. The swordsmanship was brutal, but moved along a fixed course. The amazing thing was the speed of the swordsmanship. I murmured, an incarnation can't have that level of swordsmanship. What? Jang Haeung might have missed it, but I definitely noticed. At this point in time, this speed was only possible for transcendence. My heart thumped loudly. I didn't know the identity of this woman, but if I could make her my colleague, she would surely be a great power in the Demon King selection. The moment the woman in the black cape turned around, I jumped into the alley without hesitation. Hey! I was planning to use Omniscient Reader's Viewpoint to get information while talking to her. It would be easier to persuade her if I could see her attributes window. Then if I was lucky. Quack. Before I could approach the woman and use the skill, I had to stop in place. The woman's eyes were looking at me. I trembled from the terrible emotions that were transmitted to me. Tremendous resentment and anger shot towards me. I was struck dumb by the sheer waterfall of emotions. What was this girl? Did she know me? Rather, why did she hate me so much? Chapter 229. Breaking the Sky Sword Saint. Part 3. I resisted the waves of anger and resentment and shouted towards the Punisher, wait. Just wait. Then the messages of the constellations entered my head. The constellation Prisoner of the Golden Headband is astonished. A few constellations are worried over your judgment. The constellation Prisoner of the Golden Headband is having an intense allergic reaction to your gaze. Huh? What? All of a sudden, the constellation Demon-like Judge of Fire has entered the channel. Ah, Oriel. The constellation Demon-like Judge of Fire is surprised. The constellation Demon-like Judge of Fire is surprised. The constellation Demon-like Judge of Fire is surprised. It wasn't strange for Uriel to enter the channel, since it had been a week since the Asmodeus incident. The problem was the messages from the subsequent constellations. The constellation Demon-like Judge of Fire is asking about what is happening. The constellation Prisoner of the Golden Headband says he doesn't know much. The constellation Who Likes to Change Sex is giggling. The constellation Demon-like Judge of Fire is heading towards the nebula Asgard. The sudden outpouring of messages from the constellations woke me up. What was this situation? Why were they pointing in my face? The Punisher quickly disappeared from the alley while I was confused by the messages of the constellations. Ah, wait. It was a pity. This was a chance to get a good colleague. Jang Haeung belatedly chased after me and asked, "How is it? Isn't she beautiful? When did she appear?" 3 or 4 days ago. The rumor that she is a beauty as well as having incredibly ability quickly spread. She is also elusive. Will she come tomorrow? I hadn't been able to figure out her swordsmanship, but she would definitely be a great help in the Demon King selection. By the way, where did this person come from? She wasn't in the original Ways of Survival. She comes every day, so she will probably come tomorrow. Were you fascinated by her? It's not like that. I'm joking. I know. You don't like girls. Who said that? Where did such a rumor? The constellation Demon-like Judge of Fire is looking at you. I think I knew where the rumor came from. It has been a while, Oriel. The constellation Demon-like Judge of Fire is raising her nose with an ahem. I listened to Oriel's indirect messages while heading to the treatment room with Oriel. The constellation Demon-like Judge of Fire is praising herself. Most of Uriel's stories were about how she convinced Yu Jonghyuk to go to the demon world. As expected, it was Uriel who persuaded Yu Jonghyuk to save me. It was as I thought. He wouldn't come here on his own to save me. Your symbolic body is currently being repaired. You'll be able to enter it again when it's done. The constellation Demon-like Judge of Fires is touched to tears. By the way, what personal scenario did you give Yu Jonghyuk? It would be dangerous for an archangel to release a personal scenario in the demon world. In fact, it was dangerous for a high-level constellation like Uriel to come to the demon world. The Nebula Eden had a truce with the 72 demon kings of the demon world. Perhaps Uriel was conscious of this face and manifested herself as a symbolic body instead of an incarnation body. Uriel wouldn't have been so helpless against Asmodeus if it wasn't for this. The constellation demon-like Judge of Fire is making a sullen expression. The constellation demon-like Judge of Fire says it doesn't matter anymore. Once the link between Yu Jong-hyuk and Uriel was cut off, Uriel's personal scenario had been forcibly erased. Yu Jong-hyuk said that he received another personal scenario. I was listening to Uriel's story when Jang Haeyoung interrupted. How did you become so familiar with the constellations? I am also a constellation. What? Are you joking? Didn't I tell you? Jang Haeyoung had a complicated expression on his face. A constellation, the beings in the sky? The same as the mummy who appeared in the morning? That is usually the case. That's why there is a modifier. A constellation lives in the context of that modifier. Come to think of it, there was that setting. The nature of the constellations was inside the context of the modifier. I had become corrupted as soon as I became a constellation, so I couldn't see the context. That's right. Those constellations. What is your modifier? Jang Haeyoung was conscious of my status as a constellation and became cautious. I couldn't help smiling. This bastard would probably be surprised to know who I am. The constellation demon-like Judge of Fire is alert towards the incarnation, Jang Haeyoung. The constellation demon-like Judge of Fire is warning incarnation, Jang Haeyoung, not to be too friendly. Jang Haeyoung was intimidated by Uriel and quickly moved away from me. The constellation demon-like Judge of Fire is making an angelic smile. Why did the angel say this to him? I entered the treatment room and was able to see Yu Jong-hyuk leisurely sitting at the table while drinking tea. You're late. What? You are already here? I didn't know where he went, but Yu Jong-hyuk's boots were covered with dirt. The tea had also been changed. Was there herbal tea here? Thinking about it, this guy's taste was very delicate. Yu Jong-hyuk glanced at Jang Haeyoung behind me. Is he the one you mentioned? That's right. I answered, and Jang Haeyoung stepped forward. This is the new Duke? Hello, I'm Aslan. You're a rude jerk. TL, this is because Jang Haeyoung spoke without any honorifics. Sorry, I'm actually a bitch. TL, I know some people were confused by this. Jang Haeyoung is a male, since Kim Dokja said the author took all his suggestions about the character, apart from gender. Kim Dokja suggested that the character be a beautiful woman, but the author made him a beautiful man. Then later, Jang Haeyoung replies with Earth is the only place that judges by the cover when asked if he is a man. Thus, it is likely that Jang Haeyoung has the body of a man but the mind of a female, which is why he replies like this to Yu Jong-hyuk. Their gazes clashed in the air. I felt the atmosphere become awkward and quickly interrupted. Is this the first time you've seen each other? Yu Jong-hyuk, didn't you come here a few days ago? There was no time for greetings. Then your new colleague is someone who doesn't know if he is a man or a woman? That's right. I hate weak guys. I'm not weak. Jang Haeyoung puffed up his chest, but he didn't enter Yu Jong-hyuk's eyes. He might have the unidentified wall, but his power was still insufficient compared to the transcendent Yu Jong-hyuk. They were both main characters, but Yu Jong-hyuk was the first one. Yu Jong-hyuk quietly lowered his teacup and spoke in a cold voice. He isn't worth waiting for. Surely this jerk isn't the only one? I quickly responded instead of the offended Jang Haeyoung. Oh, there's one more. I haven't talked to the person yet, but I've found a decent colleague. Who is it? She is called the Punisher. She appeared a little while ago, and I think she will be quite helpful. Yu Jong-hyuk's expression became complicated at my words. That person is impossible. What? Why? I tried to get her, but failed. What did you say to her? Were you mean? Something like, I will kill you if you don't become my colleague. I fell silent at Yu Jong-hyuk's furious expression. Yu Jong-hyuk must have a good reason if he was saying this. I didn't know, but perhaps he had a previous love or hate relationship with her. Who was that woman to have such a relationship with Yoo Jong-hyuk? She wasn't in the original. No, the original had changed a bit and there might be a new story. I should look for it soon. Then there is only one way left. Jang Haeyoung received my gaze and replied with a sulky expression. Why, what is it? Did you do what I asked correctly? I did. What about the transcendent I told you about? I got a response. Come and look. Yoo Jong-hyuk raised an eyebrow as he listened to the conversation between Jang Haeyoung and I. Transcendent? What are you talking about? This person can communicate with beings of other scenarios. Isn't he quite useful? It was a scheme to appeal Jang Haeyoung's ability to him, but Yoo Jong-hyuk's expression was still sour. So? It isn't limited to colleagues or incarnations. If we recruit constellations or transcendents, the constellations aren't possible. I can't trust them. Then you are okay with transcendence? Have you thought of someone? I nodded. I will go to First Murim. The First Murim? It is a place where transcendents are the most abundant. I know what you're thinking, but there is no guarantee that they are all superior to the constellations. There are many big evils and big demons present. I know, but aren't there others? Do you think they will all help you just because they have a touch of a chivalrous spirit? I don't remember seeing a decent human among those in Murim. I felt a deep resentment in Yoo Jong-hyuk's voice. Well, it wasn't unreasonable since he already experienced the first Murim in the last regression. However, well, at least one person might help. I watched Yoo Jong-hyuk's distorted expression and spoke in a joyful manner. I'm going to ask for help from the Breaking the Sky Sword Saint. Breaking the Sky Sword Saint. One of the most powerful transcendents in all of ways of survival. She wasn't at the top at this point in time, but her skills were enough. It was because the Breaking the Sky Sword Saint was none other than Yoo Jong-hyuk's master. Why that person? She is an unconventional existence that isn't tied to righteousness or unrighteousness. Also, isn't it natural to pick your master? Yoo Jong-hyuk's expression was worse than when the story of the Punisher came out. The sight of the disconcerted Yoo Jong-hyuk, it was really unusual. Yoo Jong-hyuk was pale and his forehead was sweaty. Absolutely not. Why? If I say no, then you can't. That person can absolutely never. Of course, I read Ways of Survival and knew why Yoo Jong-hyuk was acting like this. It couldn't be helped. This time I had to move according to my plan. No, we have to go. I've already obtained the ticket. Bayou floated in the air and made a sound. Bought. A new scenario message followed. A new sub-scenario has arrived. The first Murim was a scenario area where people frequently came and went, so I was able to purchase portal tickets from the Dakibi bag, although it required 50,000 coins. However, the advantage was that I could come and go at will. Yoo Jong-hyuk, think carefully. It might not necessarily be the Breaking the Sky Sword Saint. There are quite a few useful things you can obtain there. The first Murim was a place where a variety of warriors from the 20th to the 40th scenarios gather. If we went there at this point in time, there would certainly be a lot of information and hidden pieces available. Yoo Jong-hyuk was troubled for a long time before asking, "When are you going?" I smiled and replied, "Right now."